Hello and welcome to Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, allenwyma, and today I'm with Vince Varga, who is a podcast host of another podcast in Flutter called Flutter 101. I hope I said everything correct. I didn't double check with you, but
Yes, everything was correct.
That's pretty good though. But why don't you go ahead and quickly introduce yourself, and then you can get started with kind of interviewing you.
Yeah, so my name is Vince. I'm doing a Flutter podcast. It's called Flutter 101. I'm from Hungary and I live in Germany, Munich. And I work as a software developer at MediaMarkt Saturn, and I organize meetups here and things like that before COVID hit. But currently, just a software developer and podcast host, as you mentioned.
Yeah, so why don't we kind of start from the beginning, right? So we always send out some questions, right? And I was going through your questions before the episode, and I thought it was quite interesting, right? So you're originally from Hungary, right? So, and it's a small town. You said about 100 kilometers from Budapest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I studied there, like a high school, like until I was 18, and then went to university in Budapest, and I studied physics at the university. I think it was like a sort of like a default choice because I was good at math, I was good at physics, and I knew that I don't want to be like an engineer kind of guy. So I thought, okay, why not physics? It sounds interesting. I could be good at it because like during high school, I was good at it without, really even trying. And I thought, okay, it will be easy to do the same at the university. And I was pretty wrong at the university. Like it was much more difficult to keep up. And I think back then I also didn't really develop my work ethic. And I was just, I think it's kind of silly, but I was just surprised that, wow, I should be studying here to be like, I don't know, just to be good. Yeah, I studied physics, but what I really liked is that we had a lot of coding. So we had to code, we started with C, and then we had to code in, probably, I don't even remember all the languages that we used in different courses. I don't know, MATLAB, IDL, Fortran, C#, Java. We used all of those here and there, and C++, CUDA-C, and we had to learn these things. We had a lot of like simulations or computations and things like that. But they didn't teach us how to develop, scalable software, or they didn't teach us about software design. But I think I'm like, if I look back, I'm really happy that I had some coding there, because it really let me switch from physics to software development in a matter of months, because I already knew how to code more or less. I just had to learn JavaScript and CSS, HTML. This is how I started. So I kind of realized that I don't want to be a physicist, and I think I didn't really sit down and think, what should I do instead? I just started programming. I registered for Team Treehouse, and basically I was at home the whole day. I was watching their videos, I don't know, for weeks, maybe even months, just the whole day. And I picked up JavaScript, CSS, HTML there. And then I applied for an internship here in Germany, Munich. And yeah, this is more or less how I got started.
Okay, I'm kind of curious, though. Why did you decide you don't want to be a physicist anymore? I mean, I think it's kind of difficult, right? For me, when I did physics in school, like I always forgot certain things. Like I'm pretty good at math, I think, but then like I always forgot like drag or something, like obviously gravity or something like that. That always kind of messed up my formulas when I was trying to calculate things. Like, what was it that made you decide, okay, maybe this is not for me anymore?
I think there are many contributing factors. So one thing that I think, just I have to be honest with myself, I wasn't so good at it as the others, and I think it's a very like a competitive field. So I think it's not worth being bad at it. And there are also other factors that if you pick your field that you really want to focus on, then you can only go to a couple of countries if you really want to be successful in that field, because there are maybe, if you pick one field, then there are only a couple of sites that are really doing it well. And also, again, like it's not as easy. I mean, it's not impossible to find a job as a physicist, but it's much easier to, I don't know, move to different countries and find a job basically in a matter of weeks if you are a software developer, in my opinion. So with physics, it's not the same. And also, I think it's easier to, if you're a software developer, it's easier to kind of shift around. Maybe you could be like switch technologies. You could even switch maybe to product owner one day, and maybe you could be a good product owner. You could start your own business and things like that. And I think it's just not the same with physics.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I find a lot of people who did physics also end up in programming and especially analysts and things like that. I think I work with one guy who studied physics, but he writes strategies for trading right now, which is kind of interesting. I never really understood why physics and programming came together. Like I said, I did physics in high school, actually, not in college. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, is there really so much programming in physics that you guys actually took the time to write code? I mean, you're just running simulations, or what were you doing with it?
Yeah, most of the time. So I mean, it's not for every physicist. So you can do physics without doing much programming. So that's also true. But you need to analyze data, or you need to run simulations. Then you need to write your simulations. Then probably you need to analyze those simulations as well, or even just measurements like physical experiments. Then in the end, you need to basically analyze your data and figure out based on the raw data, what you are measuring. And I think most of the time you use computers for that. And so there is a lot of programming that you need to do if you are a physicist. I mean, most of the time. Of course, you can pick a different, like a field where you don't need much programming. But I think for the most part, it's very common that you need to run some simulations and then analyze that data in the end. And for both parts, you need programming.
So was your first time programming, was that actually with your physics class, or was it something before that? So you had some ideas before then, or?
Well, I think, I don't know if HTML, CSS counts. So when I was, I think, young, like I was probably around 12 years old, or I don't remember exactly when, but my mom thought that, why don't you learn HTML, CSS? You like computers. You are good at these things. And I went to a course with, I think, HTML, CSS. We didn't start JavaScript yet. So that was around when I was, I think, 12. But then I didn't really do much programming until university. And at the university, we started with C. And then, like, in the first year, I failed the class because that was the only class I failed at that semester. And it was just so frustrating to me that, okay, why do I need double quotes? Why do I need the semicolons? Why do I need all these things? And the next year, I actually just sit down and learned it, and then I started to like it. So the first year I failed. It was frustrating, and the second year when I retake that exam, I really prepared and I really nailed it, and then I started to enjoy it more. And yeah.
So you actually enjoy writing C? Is that actually normal?
No.
I always hear people always complain about C recently. Maybe because I'm too much in the Rust. Well, I'm really into the Rust community recently, right? And then you
Yeah.
always have a lot of people. I think the communities I'm mostly involved in recently is like Rust, obviously Dart, Flutter, and some Python recently. And those guys are all very big against C. So it's interesting to hear people say, "Oh, I started to actually like C." If I heard that
Yeah, I think
correctly.
it was like 8 years ago when that was the only programming language I knew. So I mean, and we didn't really build anything like a real word application. So we were working with, I don't know, data structures, algorithms. And I think for those, I think C is more or less, I mean, it's similar enough. But yeah, I wouldn't be able to work in a C job today. And yeah, I find also Rust very interesting. So that would be my next language I want to learn more about, because I think it looks, I don't know, really promising. Yeah, so
Did you see our last episode that just got released this week or listen to it?
I
We
didn't
actually
listen
had somebody on
to
who
all of
did
it. Oh,
a lot
sorry.
of stuff with Rust. Okay. hmm
Yeah,
No,
sorry.
I was just going to
Please
tell you that
continue.
we did something with Rust and Flutter, and that's the most popular episode so far. Like it's exceeded all other episodes in terms of both the podcast and the YouTube channel.
Oh, okay.
I was just curious
Nice.
if you took it some time to listen or watch it.
I didn't watch all of it. I think like around 30 minutes in. But yeah, I think it's a good episode, and I also really liked your episode with the Casper Lund. I think it was very interesting, and also yeah, I listened to your podcast, and I really like the episodes, and yeah, basically also the reason why I started recording my podcast, because I run a lot, and I like the only thing that you can do to learn while you are running is basically listen to podcasts or audiobooks. And I listen to podcasts a lot, and I really listen to the It's All Widgets podcast with Hila Coran. And I don't know, always so sad when there was no new episode that I could listen to. And now I'm really glad that you are also doing the podcast, and I can listen to those episodes as well. And I don't need to always listen to, I don't know, JavaScript podcasts or Python or Java podcasts. And it's good to listen to other Flutter podcasts as well. So I'm glad you are doing it as well.
Yeah, I think we when we connected a while back, right? I kind of you actually already knew that we were coming out with something, right? Because you're listening to another podcast, right? So
Yes.
you're like, "Oh, you're the guy." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm the guy."
Yeah.
So yeah, to be honest, I had no intention of ever creating a podcast, but I was in a similar boat as you, where like I was hooked on It's All Widgets podcast with Hillel, and he just wasn't releasing anything, and I was a little bit bummed about that. And I kept looking, but I wasn't looking every day, right? I kept looking, I didn't see anything. It's not a hot topic like other kind of podcasts. So when I saw that you had one, I was like, okay, great, I'm not the only one. And the one thing I really love about your show is I love the sound effect of the typing. That's one of my favorite parts. This
I have my
because I have a mechanical keyboard. I have a mechanical keyboard myself. Yeah. So did you record that yourself, or was that something you found online?
I recorded myself, and I also kind of wanted to do like ASMR videos. So yeah, I recorded myself. Yeah, I think it's an N Pro 2. But yeah, I think the clicky switches are, I don't know, I like to listen to them. And I didn't want to add like a music, because I actually didn't want to spend too much time picking the right music, and I thought like anything I pick, I will hate it probably in 3 months, and I would need to clear like the licenses and everything. And then I thought, okay, I could save myself some time and just record the keyboard noise, and I think it was, yeah, I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, I like the fact that it's like a transition in between. That's kind of cool. So I wish, I think you and I are both beginners over here, right? There's some things I can pick up from you. You're well, I'm not necessarily by myself, but I think we're still pretty bare bones, and we're all beginning at this one, right? So there's a lot to learn from both sides.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry. Let's kind of go back to the stream. Like, we don't want to get too much talking about podcast, right? This is not a show about podcasts, but I'm still interested. Like, okay, so you study physics. You said it's not for you. I totally understand. So many people are like that. Like, I knew a guy who was studying CS for like 3 years, and then one day he's like, you know what? I want to be a doctor, an MD. Okay. So then he switched to med, right? It just happens, and that's fine. So you started going to Team Treehouse. Like, why did you pick that one? Because there's actually, I mean, I don't know when this was, right? Because obviously nowadays it seems like YouTube is flooded with stuff, and same with Udemy and Coursera, all these other ones. Why did you pick Treehouse? And do they also have something with Flutter, or you're just something in particular in Treehouse that you really wanted to learn?
I'm not sure. So I didn't. So I listened to YouTube videos or I watched YouTube videos as well, but I thought that, like, I think it's not as easy to learn on YouTube because they repeat a lot of stuff often. If you don't find like one very good creator that covers everything and, I don't know, publishes their course on YouTube, then that's probably good enough. But if you just want to look things up, I think you will listen to the same things a lot of times. And I'm not sure why I picked Team Treehouse, but I really liked the fact that they had these tracks, and then you basically learn very efficiently because they thought about how to put, how to group the courses together, and then you could really just sit down, listen, and I don't know, 8 hours later, you would know a lot of things, and you didn't need to listen to the same things over and over again. So I really liked that. And they also had like, so I don't use them anymore, but back then they also had this live, like this coding, like this tiny integrated IDE sort of thing. So you could run the code there in the browser, so you didn't need to set up everything. So that was also nice. And I think just the quality of the videos were very good. And I think they really thought about like in these tracks. So I think even if you go to other websites, then most of the time it's just one short course, or maybe a longer course. But if you then you need to think more about which courses to take. And I think as a beginner, I think it's not easy to decide what to learn. And that's why I thought it was very useful for Team Treehouse to basically give me a big list that I need to learn, and that's it. So I didn't need to do research. And I think as a beginner, it's so hard to figure out what you need to learn. So basically that's why I started with Team Treehouse.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I find a lot of people actually are looking for tracks, right? I see a lot of people. I kind of hang out in the Flutter Facebook groups and see kind of what people are talking about, but people are always asking, what should I learn next? What should I learn next? But to me, the way I learn is like I have a project, or I try to make a project towards that. So then I say, okay, how can I do the next step? I think you mentioned in your notes, and I totally agree with it, is that once you learn a couple of languages, at least one language, and you kind of know, okay, how do I do a loop in this next language, or how do I do this in the language? And then you can kind of figure out the next language. The only thing that you're missing is like, how do Pythonists write Python rather than, how does it? Because I can look at Python. Like I remember when I worked in a bank and my boss is a very big Java guy. And I looked at the Python code and I said, this stuff looks like Java. And I said, did you write this? He said, yeah. How did you know? I said, because it looks like Java. So I knew it wasn't real Python code. He's like, I don't follow the PEP 8, So
yeah.
Sorry, you're going to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. So I also do it like you said, that you pick maybe like a project or, but I think for a beginner, I don't know. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't recommend it for beginners that way, because there are once you know the basics, I think that's the best way to pick some problem that you want to solve. And just as you solve the problems, you also try to, I don't know, figure out what's the right way. And also what you mentioned with, I think, idiomatic code. I think it's also important to look at other people's code so that you don't write Java except like in Python. Or I think it's like this Java, like it's very easy to recognize where people come from. And I think like Java, like people with good Java experience, when they come to JavaScript or Python, you can see immediately that, okay, this is not from an experienced Python developer, because it looks like Java except it's written in Python. So I think it happens very often.
I mean, for me, like at least you have to try to understand the basics or the most important parts of the language, right? So, talking about this kind of stuff, again, when I was in the bank, like the guy, my manager, basically started up the entire project himself, both the front and back end, and they were using React, right? And the reason that they use React in Java is because everybody else is using React in Java. So, the bad part of that is that you need to actually understand React and Java to use it properly. This guy has been using, I don't want to talk about him for so much, but he's kind of a weird guy. His history, like he was an actor turned communist politician turned Java developer turned all kind of stuff. Anyways, but a little bit of a Renaissance guy. Anyways, he wrote his React code so badly that to render 200 rows in a table took about 30 seconds.
Wow.
Which, even in writing server-side code, is really difficult to do, even with Python or something kind of slower language. So I had to go through and figure out what's going on, and I had to basically, they think they kind of misunderstood what it means by one-way data flow. I think it was like 2-way or 10-way data flow. I don't remember what happened, but I had to go through and rewrite the entire thing. So like for me, I try to learn at least what is the specifics, right? So I can do this properly. And sometimes I need that kind of 30-second, 200 rows thing, like, because it took a while for me to understand, okay, I need to keep my state changes very small or else I'll re-render the entire tree, and that could be danger for Flutter, right?
Yeah.
So that definitely was a wake-up call.
Yeah, I think it's like when you learn a new language, of course it's easy to understand, but you also shouldn't underestimate like the changes between different languages. One example for that, I think I work for a startup company, and they somehow, for some reason, every new project we had, they picked a new language. So we had so many languages there, and everyone was so proud of themselves that, okay, we are we use always the best tool that we need to use, and we can learn any language we want to. And then the guy just spent like 2 days in a JavaScript bug, because he didn't even know that in JavaScript you have like the double equals and triple equals. And I think that's why when you learn a new language, you need to kind of start with a bit of humility and try to learn it well, and just not underestimate that it's still a new language and you still need to learn its quirks. And I think also, like with JavaScript, like there is a whole book about how you don't know JavaScript, which is, in my opinion, is just full of examples that can bite you in the ass and can really make your life miserable. Like, it's basically, I think, in my opinion, it's a book about unexpected behavior, like books about unexpected behavior in JavaScript. And the book is great, and I recommend it. But like, just to demonstrate how much you need to learn if you pick up a new language, I think it's important not to underestimate that. And also, if you are a JavaScript developer, I think every coding interview is every coding interview question is about this You Don't Know JavaScript, You Don't Know JS book. And so yeah.
Is that the book by Kyle Simpson? Is that right?
Yes, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. I might put a link to that. People may be interested, because I know I definitely don't know JavaScript. I'm always a little bit surprised that nobody, because there's a lot of people who love JavaScript, right? But people don't think. Well, I just remember the book called JavaScript: The Good Parts.
The Good Parts.
Like, okay, if you have one called The Good Parts, then that must mean there was a lot of bad parts. If you have to make a book just about the good parts.
Yeah, and I think it's like a very very thin book. Like, I love that picture. I think they put next to each other the JavaScript Good Parts book, and I don't know, JavaScript. I don't remember the name of that book. Like JavaScript Essentials or Fundamentals, and there's the basically the good parts is like super thin, and the other one is like, I don't know, 600 pages, like this huge book. But yeah, I mean, I don't dislike JavaScript, because in the end I think it's a very important language, and that's the language that you can, I think, use in browsers. Of course, there are now other alternatives as well, but I think like the web browser is just so important that if you want to, I think the web platform is very important, and then you just need to learn JavaScript. I mean, of course, you can do WebAssembly and things like that, but I think they are not as good yet as like the different JavaScript frameworks. And also the ecosystem is not there yet, which doesn't mean you shouldn't learn WebAssembly or try to do that. But I think like JavaScript is just so important still.
I'm of a kind of a different opinion where, I think you will always probably need some JavaScript glue to kind of get things kickstarted. But I think there's always going to be, there with WebAssembly kind of moving forward, right? I think that people are just going to abandon JavaScript for eventually. I don't know. It'll never go away because there's so much stuff written in JavaScript that you can. It's like COBOL. The stuff is always still around since forever. It never goes away. But there'll be less and less new things kind of written in it. I think what you can do with WebAssembly nowadays, where people are actually just writing a whole app, compiling it to WebAssembly and running it in like Kubernetes or on the edge, right? I just find it hard to believe that people are just going to stick around with JavaScript because it's got too many weird quirks. And that's because it's like Java, right? It has to be backwards compatible for quite some time otherwise, it's going to be painful. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I can also see that, but I think it's just a question of timeline. So I think probably JavaScript will be less and less important, but the question is how quickly it will fade away, and like what replaces it. So I think I agree with you, but also at the same time, like the timeline, I think is just so long that I think by the time JavaScript will not, I think it will stay important for a very long time.
Yeah, well, I also agree with you on that one. I'm just hoping, luckily, I with other technologies that I have, especially Flutter, I don't need to write JavaScript. I haven't touched JavaScript in, I think it's been a year, and I think I've actually started growing back hair, because, not back hair, but growing hair back on my head, because sometimes it's so stressful, right? The triple equals, double equals, and then the other weird stuff that comes in there.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, so you did Team Treehouse. You kind of went through everything. No, I think this is a good question because, again, I see in these groups, people are learning Flutter, and they kind of want to know, how much should they know until they can get hired? How long can it take some time? How long after you took to the tracks or Team Treehouse that you were actually able to secure a job? Because I think right from Team Treehouse, then you actually found a job. Is that directly in Munich, or was it something locally first, or what happened?
So what happened is I was studying Team Treehouse, I think 1 month or 2 months, more or less. I think 1 month, that was like a very, very intense, where I learned a lot. and then I could only find an internship actually. So I mean, I wasn't like full 100% job ready. I could find an internship that paid like a little. So it didn't pay well, but it was fine to get started. And I think it was like 1 or 2 months. And like at the interview, I think they kind of like there were a lot of things that so they hired for an intern position, so they weren't so strict about things. They just like there were so many things that I didn't know well, that I think are pretty basic. But I think what's important is that if you want to find a job, just don't wait too long. And of course, it's always good to know your level. So don't apply for, I don't know, CTO position if you coded a month at home on Team Treehouse. But for an internship, it was enough. And I think then it was like a very good learning experience, because it was like a middle-sized startup company. I think now they are much bigger, but back then I could sit next to the founder, and he was really just, I don't know, helping me or paying attention to what I do. And he was, I don't know. So I think real world like experience helps a lot. And I think it really helped me get my next job a couple of months later. But yeah, I think of course it depends. If you didn't code before, probably you will need more time, because I remember like the first time I coded at the university, and I think we like built like these pyramids or like these Christmas trees with like, I don't know, like these asterisks and characters to practice for loops. It was like, I don't know, it was difficult for the first time. But when I wanted to switch to software development, I already knew all of this. So I just had to learn like one technology that like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I mean, it's 3 different technologies, but web development, I had to learn web development. And once I learned that, I applied for an internship. The interview didn't go too well, but they decided to hire me. And also, I think it comes down to like small things. I remember they were kind of surprised that I had like a GitHub account, and that like they were happy that I wrote like very clear commit messages. And so they were ready to, I don't know, accept some things that I didn't do well, because they saw the potential, or they saw that I'm not a, I don't know, complete idiot, and that I'm able to learn. So yeah, I think, the internship was very good. I built so many things, and I could see how Scrum works, how the dailies work, and just pick up how, I don't know, people work together, because I think that this is also another important thing that you need to learn, is how to work with other people, how to not make their lives miserable, how to not take things too seriously. Because I think in the end, like back then, like during my career, I was sometimes so frustrated with things that matter so little. And I think that makes other people's lives worse. And I think it's also kind of like a skill to learn how to accept decisions that you don't agree with. But yeah, I think I'm going off on a tangent here. Yeah.
No, actually, I would like to kind of go back, right? You said your interview didn't go too well. I would kind of like to hear about why you think your interview didn't go too well, but then also why you think that they still decided to give you a shot, because that's a huge thing. Because people, I mean, I just had an interview with the guy on Friday. It was definitely difficult, and the part of that was difficult was that so I think you know, and people, I think the audience definitely knows that I'm living in Hong Kong, so, right? So obviously English is not their first language, not your first language either. Same with Germany. I think Germans, they don't generally they're not so fluent in English as other places, maybe, especially like Holland, I think. But Hungary's got quite a good English, I think. But in any case, a lot of Hungarians I meet, they speak perfect English, at least perfect American style. I didn't even know they're Hungarian, but maybe that depends on who they are. But anyways, going back to the main topic, right? We had this interview, and I had the worst time trying to communicate with this guy, and I tried to just talk it up to, okay, you know, maybe it's just a language problem, right? Because he's native from Hong Kong, his language is Cantonese. I had the HR lady next to me who works with me, and I said, hey, why don't you just try to talk to him and see, you know, ask him this question for me and see what his reply is. But she also couldn't communicate with him, right? So I looked at his CV, and I could see that he knew some things, but and he had a really good, interesting background, especially in mobile development, because we still do Flutter apps. But the communication was really a big issue. And so that's really what kind of took it down. Like, that's how he kind of lost out, is that he couldn't communicate. Although it looks like from his CV, his experience was really good. What really killed it for him was just communication. The fact that he couldn't even communicate in his own language was a really big problem. Like, for instance, we would say, you know, like, did you eat today? And then he'd start talking about apples and how he likes to go out for walks. Like, it was like, you know, I'm trying to give you an idea about how he would kind of just go off on a tangent and just keep going out for forever, like a vector, right? Keep going, no end. So that kind of what killed for me. So that's what I kind of judge on. You know, can I communicate with this guy? He doesn't have to have great English, but at least I can communicate with him, or somebody else can. He kind of knows what he's working with, or if he doesn't even if he doesn't know Flutter, is he able to learn it? And also, when he does learn technology, does he actually dig deep into it so he really gets it, like we talked about earlier, right? Like, so that's why I asked, can you maybe talk about what happened with your side, right?
Whew. I don't remember that well. So I think there was like the chat. So I got a coding challenge in the morning. So I spent one day there for the interview. Before that, I had like a Skype interview. I think that went quite well. Of course, that interview wasn't so like technical. So I think so I got like a coding challenge. I think it was some kind of, so it's a smart thermostat company. It's called Tado. And I think, if I remember correctly, the challenge was some kind of calculation. So with a slider or something like that. So with a couple of parameters to kind of calculate like the savings that you could achieve with a smart thermostat. I don't know if I remember correctly, but more or less, like you got like a couple of input fields or sliders, and then you had to like live update your calculation and your recommendation based on that information. And that was the challenge. And I think I remember that so I thought I know enough to do that, and I actually knew. Oh, and one thing that I think maybe is important, that I was learning like JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and I learned the challenge was in AngularJS, and basically I figured out that the challenge will be in AngularJS like the day before. And so I basically had like, I don't know, like 2-3 hours learning AngularJS. So maybe that also explains why it didn't go too well, because just things didn't want to like update that should be. And also I remember I had to look up. So in JavaScript objects, you have the dot notation, but you also have this square bracket notation with this. Then you put the property name in square brackets, and I know that I was just mixing those in the same line, and they asked me, okay, why do you mix those? And I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know. I was under time pressure. I was nervous. I didn't even realize that they mean the same thing. And I was, I think it didn't go too well. But in the end, I solved the problem. I think, I spoke, like I communicated well enough, well enough, and and also I think maybe that's why they accepted me, because it was an internship, and they just thought, okay, it's not a big risk. I will be there for 3 months, and if I'm bad, like it's not a lot of money for the company, or they could also just fire me. And I think that's why maybe they weren't so strict, because it was an internship, so they could just wait the 3 months and I will be gone anyway. So I'm not sure exactly why they decided to hire me. But actually, I mean, I solved a challenge. And I think, one thing I wanted to mention, I think, is that like learning English well, I think it's quite important, because maybe you don't have, like, maybe you have great ideas, but if you can't communicate those ideas, I think it's almost as if you didn't have those great ideas. And I think it's, especially I think in Europe, like the semi-official, the de facto language for software developers is English. And here we have a lot of people from a lot of different countries. So I think maybe if your accent is not the best, it's fine. But I think it's very important to try to always improve your language skills. Just wanted to mention that. And also there are so many great resources available in English. And if I wanted to learn Flutter and I only spoke Hungarian, then I would have no chance, because there are no resources available in Hungarian, or at least not as many as in English. So I think English is quite important for us.
No, I also think so. I feel a little bit kind of bad that I'm a native speaker, and especially most of the programming is also actually using American English, right? I see a lot of people actually complaining, how come I can't say background color with a U when I write my CSS? I always mess this up. I'm like, I don't have any problems. I'm good. Why would you add a U? So I'm a little bit kind of spoiled in that sense. But I mean, at the same time, it's also interesting as somebody who lives abroad. And I do study a little bit in of course Cantonese and Mandarin. That when you start to learn another language, whether it's English or Spanish or whatever, you learn more about the culture, right? And you start to kind of understand more about what's going on. And I think that's also a huge thing too, especially like if you're going to be working like in UK, you should definitely learn UK English, because there's a lot you can learn. And it's not only the words, right? It's also the style. Again, going back to what we're talking about with Java style, with Python code, if you use American style with UK English, it's going to be a little bit weird, right? They definitely speak differently out there. I don't know if how it is in Germany, but I'm guessing that they probably also speak UK style English. But maybe because it's software, they might speak American style where you are.
I think most people speak the American style English. Mm-hmm. I think it's easier and feels more natural. So, and it's like of course we kind of adapt to native speakers in our group. So it also happens to me when I speak with people from the UK for a long time, that I kind of pick that up. But my default English is sort of like this American English, I think, because it's I don't know, it feels more natural to me. And I'm also basically just the content I watch is basically almost exclusively from the US. So like series, Netflix and YouTube videos, YouTube creators. And I think I just listen to more US English material. Well,
I also want to tell everybody in the audience that even for me, I had to actually study English. So let me kind of come back to this and tell you what I'm talking about. Before I moved to Hong Kong, I was actually living in Shanghai, China for about 4 years or something like that. And it's easy to get around, I can do things. I was already studying Chinese Mandarin in school. But once I moved to Hong Kong, I'm not kidding you, I actually downloaded a dictionary for English. I'm not kidding you at all, because there's so many words here that is from UK that I never knew what it was. So they talk about like, okay, please alight from the left side or the right side, you know, which way to alight. We never say alight. You say get off, you know, you get off over here. The door will open over here, right? People over here, they talk about, you know, cheers. I said, we're not drinking alcohol. What are you talking about? When they say cheers, they're talking about thank you. So it took me, even now, I still kind of forget these things because, yeah, like you said, American kind of media is quite strong, especially in the IT industry. And so I'm lucky that most people are speaking in American English, but there's still quite a few people who did study in UK. They talk to me and then there's some words I'm like, sorry, I don't understand what you're talking about. Can you please explain? Or they have, you know, different slang, because in UK they also have their own slang. And I don't know what, they keep talking about taking a piss out of something. I still takes me some time to figure out what the heck they're talking about. Maybe you know, I think you know what I'm talking about. You probably heard that before.
Yeah.
But there's, you know, there's certain slang that I still takes me some time to kind of wrap my head around. So the main reason I'm talking about this is because, you know, don't be worried. You know, even for me, who's a native English speaker, you will still have issues where, you know, you don't understand somebody else's English, and it happens, right?
Yeah.
So take your time. Learning a language, I think, is similar to learning a language for like programming, right? You need to understand not just the words and how you translate directly, but also the culture involved too. Yeah. So it's very interesting, and that's the best part about language, is that even no matter programming or speaking, right? There's a culture to it, and it's very interesting, and there's a lot of stuff behind it, and I love to dig into this topic. But yeah, I think we're talking too much about other things rather than kind of what we talked about. I have no problem with that, but I want to kind of try to have some kind of script.
You guide the conversation wherever you want to. So yeah.
And then, okay, so you took the internship, and then from there now you're working in. I mean, I guess you worked in a couple of different companies, or you just went from internship to where you are right now?
No, I switched. I think I worked for a couple of. So I worked for a couple of companies, and yeah, so I think I switched around every 1 or 2 years so far, and yeah, my last 2 employers were using Flutter, and between those, I worked a bit on the back end. I worked a bit as like this data engineering kind of guy. I think I enjoyed that a lot because it was good, because I could use my physics skills or like my math knowledge. But in the end, I think it was not as easy to find good jobs with that. So I kind of just went back to web development, backend, front end. And at one company, it was like an online therapy platform. So what they did is they kind of they connected therapists and patients. They had like this video call platform, and also a couple of supporting features like questionnaires for the patients, and like messaging between them, and scheduling and things like that. And one, like we were considering building a mobile application, and we had a hackathon where I knew that I wanted to try Flutter, because back then I had been like following Flutter like a little bit for years, and then I thought, okay, let's try this project with Flutter, and let's try to build this. Like we had like an internal hackathon where we had pizza, and it was like kind of this fun day together where we didn't work on the regular features, but we kind of did this spike where everyone could try their own like cross-platform or whichever, I mean, or native like choice, and we could all work on a project, and I decided to use Flutter, and I think it was just it felt so, I don't know, good, and I could build so much more than the others, that I really, I don't know, I decided that I want to work with Flutter for the next couple of years. I started a meetup group in Munich, because I also thought that it would be great to be able to speak to other people who are working with Flutter, because I think that's a really good way to share knowledge, or at least to figure out what you don't know. Because if there are two people talking about Flutter and you cannot follow the conversation, then you kind of know what to look up the next time you learn about Flutter. So I started a meetup group, and then I switched to a company that, it was a buddy of mine. We worked together before, and they founded a startup company, and they needed Flutter, and I just joined mainly because of that, because I wanted to work with Flutter. Of course, I also found the project interesting, and yeah, if you have any questions or
No, I always find it quite admirable that, people who choose, they choose their job based on the technology they want to work with, right? It's not everybody can do that, and not everybody does do that. So it's always good to do. But I mean, after playing with Flutter for some time, yeah, I'm totally in line with you on that part. Yeah, that's exactly why we use Flutter over here, because I like it. I'm always open for the next technology, but yeah, I mean, you have to prove it to me, right, that it's really worth it. So, okay. Sorry, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking, I think we're kind of caught up to where you are now. We already have another podcast episode getting recorded after this between you and I now for your side. Yeah. I have a pretty good kind of idea where you are. It's interesting to see where you're working at, and that's where you are right now, right? That's the media. Sorry, the name is.
Yeah. So I work at MediaMarkt
Saturn.
So it's like a large consumer electronic retail e-commerce company in Europe. They are present in a couple of countries. So Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Italy, Netherlands, Spain, Turkey, Hungary. So they are like a relatively big company. That was my first enterprise job. Before that, I always worked for smaller startup companies. So I find it very interesting because also like the challenges are different. The problems that you need to solve are different. And yeah, I think it's quite fun to work here. And yeah. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. I think, we could start to wrap up unless there's something else you wanted to talk about. You're approaching the end of the time.
No, I think it's fine.
Okay. We have a couple of questions we like to usually ask, right? So I think most of these is pretty clear, right? How do you feel about the state of education in the Flutter community right now with podcasts and everything like that?
I think it's pretty good. So I like to learn from videos most of the time. So I think there are lots of great YouTube channels and also like paid courses online, also both from the community and from the Flutter team. So I think that part is really good. The official documentation is also very good and it's getting better. So I think it's also like if you read an article maybe 2 years ago, maybe it's time to take another look at that article because the documentation is being improved all the time. I think it's also very good that most of the projects, I mean, basically all of the projects or dependencies that you will bring in your code is open source. So you can look up everything on GitHub, on pub.dev. You can take a look at the source code. So I think that's great to be able to do that because maybe you see a good plugin that does what you want and it's doing something very complicated, and then you can just go on GitHub and figure out how it works. I think also I like Twitter for software development related stuff, and for Flutter related stuff. I think a lot of people share like designs or code snippets online, or just opinions. I think that's also like a good way to learn more about things. So I think it's pretty good, but I think again, if like state of Flutter education or but with that, I think it's also, I think if you are completely new to programming, me personally, I think I would probably start with a bit of JavaScript, Python, or Java, because I think those are the languages where most of the like training material or educational material is available, especially for beginners. So I think I didn't see a lot of like content with Dart and Flutter that are aimed at beginners. But apart from that, if you already know maybe one language, I think the Dart as a second language is like a very good choice, because I think it kind of, so to me, when I started using Dart, I started, so back then I used TypeScript, JavaScript, and a bit of Java. And for me, Dart was like the ideal combination of these languages, because it was not too verbose, but it had like this strong type safety, and I think it was I think it's a great language to learn. And yeah, now we have a couple of podcasts. I know that some podcasts are like, there are podcasts in other languages as well. So maybe if you speak maybe Spanish or Portuguese, or maybe even, I think I saw some Russian podcasts before. I think it's also good to take a look at those podcasts. I listened to the Spanish podcast, and it was, I think it's also great. And also your podcast, obviously, mine, the It's All We Just podcast, and yeah, I think also books. There are great books, free books, paid books as well. So I think also a lot of projects have very good documentation. So one example that came to my mind is the Block project, because I think their documentation could be like its own little book. I think it's so well written, and if you just read the whole documentation for Block, then I think you will be very you will be very effective with Block as well. So I think I think I really like the ecosystem so far. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I think, we have a lot to talk about, and yeah, I love to hear your background and everything. It's always good to hear kind of where people come from and why they discovered Flutter and why they think it's good and this kind of stuff. I'm also hoping to hear from other people who don't like Flutter and maybe decided not to use it, right? We had one guest on in the past who built a desktop app and they didn't use Flutter, although they're using Flutter for mobile apps. So it's love to hear, okay, why did you not do it, right? This seems like a logical choice. So, okay. Do you have any plugs or anything you wanted to shout out for? I think you already shout out for your own. There's Flutter 101. So if you go to flutter101.dev, I believe that's your homepage. And of course, you can find your podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, quite a few others. So we should probably put a couple of links in there.
I think that's the only thing that I want to plug. Yeah.
That's the most important thing to plug, right?
That's everything. I think the podcast, the Flutter 101, so 101 .dev. You can also just search for Flutter on most of the important podcast platforms. So I don't know, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and a couple of others. I also don't really keep track of those. I just listed my podcast on a couple of other platforms as well. But yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think we lost connection for a moment, but hopefully everything will be good. At least it's at the end. So, okay, thanks so much for coming on. I should probably have you back, but it seems like we can never run out of topics to talk about. But it seems like mostly not about Flutter. So that's also
yeah,
okay.
We can also talk more about Flutter. But yeah, it was great to be here, and I'm really glad that you are also doing the podcast. Awesome.
All right, so thanks for coming. Hopefully, see you again.
Yeah. Bye-bye.